Rubbish. My father said it loud enough for the glass doors of Louis Vuitton to shake. Then he looked straight into my face and spit on my shoe. Not on the sidewalk, not in secret, right there on the white stone entrance where families were taking pictures. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand like he had just done something heroic, and the crowd of relatives behind him started laughing. Aunt Monica held up her phone and whispered to her friend that this would be funny for Facebook. My younger brother Tyler nudged two cousins and said $20 shoes. That is all she owns. I stood there holding the warm paper bag from the lunch my father forced me to pay for a $186 bill, including the 25% tip he said I should add if I had any dignity. My mother looked at me the way she always looked at me in these moments. Face frozen, shoulders small. She did nothing because doing something would have consequences at home. I stared at my reflection in the glass. Cheap cotton shirt, hair pulled into a low tie, shoes that looked plain and dull. To them, I was useless, invisible, a burden. I swallowed and tried to breathe. My father raised his voice again and said if I could not pay for lunch without shaking, I should take a rideshare home alone and stop embarrassing the family. He told everyone to follow him inside the boutique so they could look at real leather and real handbags instead of trash taped to her feet. Then a man in a dark suit turned his head. He worked there. The manager. He was holding an NFC scanner and watching my father talk as if every word was a crime. His name tag said Marcus and I would learn later that he had seen hundreds of rich, loud customers, but never a parent spitting on a daughter's shoes. I did not move. Inside my purse was a cashier's check for $3,500, ready to return to Aunt Monica, so she could never call her favor a favor again. There was also a folder with printed statements from my 529 college fund that my father emptied in 2018. $27,400 gone overnight. He said it was family money, and I was lucky he even let me finish school. I looked at the lunch receipt and felt something change, a small, sharp click inside my chest. I stepped forward and told my father he should hold on to the receipt so he could remember the day his $20 daughter tipped better than he ever had. Tyler opened his mouth like he wanted to laugh, but nothing came out. The manager walked toward me calm and direct and asked politely if he could scan my shoes. My father rolled his eyes and said the shoes cost less than his socks. The manager lifted the scanner. A small beep echoed under the awning. His eyebrows rose. The crowd went quiet. Marcus checked a second time. Then his voice carried across the entrance. These were not $20 shoes. These were Louis Vuitton, limited edition. One of 14 pairs released worldwide. Their insurance value was $120,000. Aunt Monica's phone lowered. Tyler's face lost its color. Even strangers stopped walking. For a few seconds, no one breathed. My father whispered no, but the manager continued. The serial number was clean. The purchase history confirmed. The scan matched the hidden NFC chip built into the sole. The shoes that looked like nothing were more valuable than every handbag in the window. I turned to my father and pulled out the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply held up the statement showing the $27,400 taken from my college fund in 2018. Then I placed the lunch receipt on top of it, $186, with his signature, and the text messages demanding I transfer $9,800 to Tyler's startup within 48 hours. My father said I had dragged the family name through the mud. But right there in front of everyone, he became the man who stole from his own daughter and laughed while doing it. Marcus stepped back and quietly asked if I needed security. I told him no. I did not need security. I needed truth. And truth had already walked out of his mouth. The sun hit the polished toe of my rubbish shoe, and the gold thread shimmered like a blade. For the first time in years, I did not feel small. I felt awake. When my father tried to say it was a misunderstanding, the words fell like coins into an empty box. No weight, no value, just noise. People looked at him the way you look at a stranger caught stealing in church, silent, cold, judging. And I thought this is what dignity feels like. Not shouting, not begging, just letting the world see what was already true. You want to know what happened next. You want to know if he apologized, if the family defended me or tried to twist the story again. But the best part has not happened yet. If you have ever lived with toxic family, financial betrayal, humiliation that tore a part of your soul, you already know. Quiet justice is slow. Silent revenge walks on steady feet. And the day you stop hiding your receipts is the day the world finally sees who the real problem was. Still here. After the scene at Louis Vuitton, I walked away without looking back, because if I looked back, I might lose the fragile line between anger and clarity that was holding me upright. And I needed that clarity more than I needed another argument. The sunlight in Austin was sharp that afternoon, and when I reached the parking lot near the palm trees, I sat in my old Civic and stared at the cashier's check in my purse, $3,500, the last remnant of what Aunt Monica believed was a favor she could weaponize forever. Lakeway, Texas rolled across my memory, the small house where my mother Sandra lived, in quiet routines where every object whispered about a life held together by thin glue and tolerance. Ray did not live there, but his voice did his orders, did his opinions did, because even though they were separated on paper, he commanded the family through group chats and weekly cookouts, like a monarch who did not need a crown. My mother answered him with careful yeses because she knew his anger arrived fast and stayed long. She was not weak. She was tired in the way trees are tired when storms return. Every season I used to think the worst part of growing up with a toxic family was the shouting. But I learned. The real cruelty was quiet. The messages, the guilt, the humiliation that dripped day after day until you believed it was normal. The seed of injustice in my story did not start at the Louis Vuitton doors. It started in 2018 when I was 18 years old and finishing high school. I had a $529 college fund with $27,400 that my grandparents built slowly for me. They were gone by then, but the money stayed, and it felt like a promise. Then one morning, my father told me that college was too expensive and the roof needed repairs. I looked at the online statement and saw the balance was zero. He said he took it to save the house and he promised he would replace every dollar, but promises from a man like him are not currency. They evaporate. So I worked 2 shifts at a diner and sold class notes and applied for every scholarship that existed. I kept the screenshots of the empty fund because I could not afford to forget in those late nights wiping tables. I learned how humiliation turns into ambition and that no one will rescue you. You build your escape brick by brick, year by year, step by quiet step. I earned a scholarship, moved to Austin, studied economics and cryptography, and after graduation I joined Atlas Ridge Capital. Officially, I was an operations associate, one of the quiet workers organizing risk reports and meeting calendars. But in reality, my job was alpha research on digital asset volatility. I built models at night when offices were empty, and by May 2025, my strategy returned $1,870,000 year to date. I printed the P&L once stared at the numbers and locked it in a desk drawer. I did not tell my family, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew that when toxic people smell success, they do not celebrate it. They try to carve a peace for themselves. I wanted peace. I wanted silence. But silence ends the moment. Toxic relatives want money. 2 weeks before the Louis Vuitton humiliation, my father sent a text message that said Tyler needed $9,800 for a startup. He wrote that it was my turn to help the family, and that if I did not provide the money within 48 hours, I could pack my things and stop calling myself a daughter. He followed with a second message, calling me a freeloader who ate beans in someone else's house. I was renting my own apartment, but to him, facts did not matter. Control, did I read the text while sitting at my desk in the office? The lights humming above me, my coworkers laughing about something small, and I realized he was never going to change. Toxic family is like gravity, pulling you down unless you cut the tether. I printed the message, placed it inside my personal folder with the screenshot of the empty 529 fund and the lunch receipt building my archive of truth. I decided on a mini revenge, not loud, not violent, just precise and clean. I walked into a Chase branch on North Lamar, asked for a cashier's check for $3,500, the exact amount Aunt Monica bragged she loaned me during college, even though she was the one who insisted on giving it and then mentioned it every Thanksgiving. I placed the check inside a plain envelope with a single note that said, "From now on, there are no favors between us." I delivered it to her mailbox without a word. The chain broke in that moment. Money is not just currency, it is a boundary. I made dinner alone that night. Pasta in a small bowl, and I imagined how quiet life could be if I kept building walls of receipts, one layer at a time, until no one could climb in and take what I earned. In my phone, I organized everything into folders, the text from my father demanding money, the screenshot of the 529 fund drained in 2018, the picture of the lunch receipt with his signature, the silent proof of betrayal in every direction. That week, Tyler posted photos of shoes and a designer belt tagging friends and pretending he was building a business. Everything in his life was borrowed debt, disguised as status. The next morning, my father called my mother and shouted so loudly, I heard through the speaker, he told her I was ungrateful. Money was supposed to stay in the family, and if I did not help Tyler, then he would show the entire family what kind of selfish person I was. My mother cried after he hung up. I made tea for her. She apologized to me without knowing why that is. What toxic family does. It lies so long that even the innocent say, sorry. I hugged her and promised things would change. She asked how, and I said, with truth, not anger. 2 days later, the lunch trip happened, and after it ended, I sat in my car and looked at the skyline of Austin blurring through the windshield. I told myself that dignity over money was the only choice that could save me. If I gave in once, I would give in forever. I thought about that cashier's check waiting in my purse, about the P&L number hidden at work, about the little flame inside me that refused to die. And I knew what I had to do. I was done. Being the quiet daughter with cheap shoes and no voice, I was Lena Whitmore, and I had the receipts. If anyone has ever lived inside a story about toxic family, betrayal, revenge, story money conflict, justice story, financial and betrayal family karma, they understand that silence is not peace. Silence is just waiting for the day. The truth walks out of the dark. If you have ever chosen dignity over money, if you have ever refused to borrow love, say the word that keeps your spine straight and your heart clean. Say dignity. The next Saturday came faster than I wanted, and the heat sat heavy on the domain as families shopped and laughed, and the world seemed built for people who never learned to fear their own blood. My mother walked between Ray and Tyler, trying to keep peace the way she always did. I stayed a few steps behind and watched their shadows stretch across the pavement. Like a warning, Ray talked loudly, as if volume was proof of importance. And when he paused in front of a group of relatives who had driven in from Round Rock for a small family lunch, he pointed at my shoes and told everyone that I still wore $20 knockoffs, even though I lived in a city with money. He said, real women take pride in themselves. He said I was too cheap to invest in anything. Decent laughter rippled through the group like broken glass scattered on concrete. Aunt Monica smirked and lifted her phone like she wanted proof for later. Tyler muttered that I should hide my feet under the table. There is a kind of humiliation that does not need shouting. It just needs an audience and the permission to treat someone as less. Ray snapped his fingers and handed me bags to carry while he and the others walked ahead. I followed with my head low, not because I accepted my place, but because I was saving my strength for the moment that would matter inside the restaurant. Ray waved the waiter over and ordered the most expensive dishes steaks for himself and Tyler, and a round of sides. He leaned back with confidence and said the men of the family should eat well. He told the table I would pay, because young people needed to learn responsibility. He said this while looking directly at me. daring me to contradict him, daring me to embarrass my mother. I stayed quiet and watched food arrive, watched plates empty and forks scrape, and the bill climb higher with every smile he gave to the relatives who believed his version of reality. Then at the end, he patted his pockets with exaggerated confusion and announced that he must have left his wallet in the car. He looked at me and said I could cover the meal that a grown daughter should be able to pay for a simple family lunch. The bill was $186. I pulled out my card with steady hands and tipped 25% because humiliation should not spread to the staff. The waiter thanked me, and Ray leaned back like a king who had proven a point. But mini revenge can taste sweeter when served quietly. So, before we left, I walked back to the hostess stand and asked for a printed receipt, listing every item and the name of the person who ordered them. The hostess looked confused but agreed. I pointed at Ray and said he was the one who ordered the steaks and wine. I smiled politely and asked her to write his full name near the subtotal so I could send him a picture as a keepsake. Because he was such a generous father, the hostess gave a small laugh. Maybe she thought I was joking, but I folded the receipt and slid it into my purse outside. Ray tossed the shopping bags at me and told me to hold a spot in line at a boutique so the adults could look around. I stood there under the sun while people passed laughing and holding hands, and I wondered how many others stood in places like that pretending not to feel worthless, pretending not to shake. My mother approached quietly and whispered that I should not take things so personally, that family and money were complicated, but there is a line where complication ends and cruelty begins, and that line had been crossed over and over until the ground was a trench. I told her I needed a minute alone. She nodded and walked away as soon as the boutique opened and Ray and the relatives piled inside with wide eyes for designer bags. I followed slowly and felt the floor under my feet as if preparing for impact. Marcus, the manager, was at the counter organizing displays. He saw us and greeted Ray with professional warmth. Ray pretended he belonged there. He touched products like they were disposable. He pointed at items he had no intention of buying. Then he noticed me near the shoes and said in a voice loud enough for customers to hear that nothing in that store was meant for someone like me, that I should stick to my $20 garbage. The word garbage stung deeper than the price humiliation in public sticks to the skin like oil, hard to wash off. I took a slow breath, let the anger settle, and then held up one shoe, the same pair on my feet, but in a display version, I asked Marcus quietly if he could check a serial number, because I believed someone in my family thought it was fake. Marcus looked curious. He asked for the shoe on my foot and scanned the code. He frowned. His eyes moved from the screen to my face. Something shifted in his expression as he asked if I would like the insurance value, and I said yes, please, in the calmest voice I could manage. While he processed the details, Ray leaned against the counter and joked to strangers that I probably stole the shoes. He said I had nothing to my name. He said I wished I could be as successful as my brother. People laughed, with the easy cruelty of strangers who assume the loudest man is telling the truth. Marcus returned, holding the shoe like it was art, his voice firm. He said this was a limited edition piece, one of 14 pairs released insured at $120,000. The air in the boutique cracked open. Silence rushed in. The relatives froze. Aunt Monica lowered her phone. Tyler blinked as if trying to recalculate reality. Ray choked on his next joke. Marcus asked if I needed security to escort the shoes to a safe area. I told him, no thank you, that I would hold them myself. I watched the confusion bloom across Ray's face. He looked at the shoes as if they had betrayed him. I asked Marcus if he could print a small certificate of authenticity with the serial number. He nodded and went to the back office. When he returned, he handed me the certificate and thanked me for bringing such a rare item to the store, because it was always a pleasure for the staff to see true craftsmanship. I slipped the certificate into the same purse that held the lunch receipt, proof layered on proof, humiliation beginning to bend back toward justice. I told Ray that I would love to take a family picture right in front of the display, since he had been educating everyone about quality. Earlier, he muttered something angry and walked toward the exit. Relatives scattered after him. The moment was small, but it was a crack in the wall. He built around himself a crack wide enough for truth to slip through. I stood near the door and told Marcus I would return later. He nodded and said if I ever needed verification again, he would handle it personally. I stepped outside and watched Ray and the others hurry down the sidewalk, silence trailing behind them like a tail. I realized humiliation cuts two ways. It wounds the victim, but it also exposes the bully, and in the presence of facts, the loudest man becomes the smallest. If anyone reading this has ever been humiliated in public by family or made to feel like $20 garbage in a world obsessed with appearances, tell me you have seen it. Tell me you stayed standing. Tell me you have seen how truth waits for its turn to speak. Say the word seen. After the scene at the boutique, Ray pretended nothing had happened. He walked ahead with the swollen pride of a man who believed the world still bowed to him. The relatives whispered behind their hands. My mother kept her head low and Tyler scrolled his phone, like humiliation was background noise for most of my life. This was how every confrontation ended, with Ray deciding reality, and everyone else agreeing, because resistance was exhausting. The cruelty was never constant. It came in waves that seemed harmless to outsiders, but each wave cut a little deeper until the skin of your spirit peeled back. When I was 17, he used to open my wallet just to sneer at the crumpled bills. He said girls with cheap purses ended up with cheap lives. Once he made me walk 2 miles home from the Domain because traffic annoyed him, and he said maybe struggle would teach me gratitude. My mother tried to pick me up, but he took her car keys so she could not leave. Humiliation was his language, and control was the grammar. It was never loud, just steady and suffocating. He liked to tell the family that I was stubborn and ungrateful, and because he said it with a shrug and a laugh, they believed him over the years. He learned that the quietest way to control someone was through money and technology. Mother Sandra depended on the family phone plan because he handled the bills one morning in April. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a tremor in her hands. She needed a telehealth appointment for her blood pressure medication. She clicked the link and nothing happened. She tried again and again while Ray watched from the couch, pretending to scroll sports news. She whispered that the internet might be down, and he savored the moment before announcing that he had canceled her data. Because she wasted too much time online. He said if she wanted to talk to doctors, she could walk into a clinic. She was humiliated. Small humiliation, but sharp. She asked him to turn it back on, and he laughed. A deep, satisfied laugh. The kind of laugh that tastes like rust and old bitterness. I sat beside her and saw the defeat in her eyes, a quiet apology that she existed under his rule. Ray used his role as father, like a weapon he controlled without touching. He always told relatives that mother was forgetful and clumsy, that he had to manage the finances. It made her look dependent and made him look righteous. But it was just financial control dressed in polite clothes the next day while he napped. I took my mother to a mobile shop at the edge of Lakeway. I bought her a prepaid line for 12 months paid in full. No contract, no strings. She held the slim phone like it was fragile, like she was not sure she deserved ownership of anything. I told her it was hers, completely hers. And I handed her a small envelope with receipts and account information and a note that said, "No one has the right to silence you." She cried quietly and said thank you, like the words hurt her mouth. It was a mini revenge, nothing flashy, but some victories are small because the wounds are hidden under years of emotional bruises. Ray found out 2 days later when Mother missed one of his calls. He stormed into her room and demanded to know what she had done. She said calmly that the doctor had reached her through her secure line and everything was fine. There was no anger in her voice, just a tired peace. He shouted, he cursed. He said she made him look like a fool, but it was too late. Power had slipped from his fingers. I watched him pace the hallway with frustration that tasted like hunger. Financial control was his favorite trick because it left no bruises, just a trail of receipts and silence. He could not reverse the prepaid plan because he had no access. It was the first boundary I ever saw my mother hold, and even though her hands trembled, she refused to hand him the phone. Ray began escalating. In little ways, he made snide comments in front of relatives that mother wasted money on unnecessary pills. He planted seeds of doubt so the family would see him as a good man, suffering under women who did not appreciate his sacrifice. He called me ungrateful for interfering. He said I was showing off even though all I had done was buy a phone. But small steps build momentum, and for the first time I realized that quiet justice did not have to be loud, it just had to be consistent. Around this time, I kept every receipt, every bill, every screenshot of his messages. I tracked the cost of the prepaid plan. I saved the invoice for mother's blood pressure appointment. I kept the lunch receipt with his name, the certificate for the shoes. The screenshot of the 529 account from 2018 that showed $27,400 withdrawn under his authorization. Money that was meant for my education, but vanished while he bought new wheels and told the family he was saving the house. I remembered scrubbing floors in a Santa Monica bar, studying through headaches applying for scholarships. While other students went on spring break, Mother felt guilty for not protecting the money, but she could not fight him. Then she had no access. She had no voice. Controlling a woman's money is the fastest way to cage her. And I knew that from the inside out. That is why I saved everything. Every screenshot, every digital breadcrumb one night. After too many small humiliations piled up, I sat on my bed with the folder open, the receipts spread like tarot cards, telling the story of a daughter who refused to disappear. I thought about how revenge did not have to be violent. It could be paperwork. It could be proof. It could be the moment the world sees who is lying and who is tired of being lied about. A week later, Ray tried to access Mother's old line and found it disconnected. He kicked the front door and yelled that he was the head of the household. I waited in the living room with my laptop open and simply told him that the phone was paid for, that he no longer handled her communication, and that she would no longer be cut off from doctors or family. His eyes burned with fury, but he could not stop us. His voice cracked in a way I had never heard, and he turned to Tyler, demanding that he back him up. Tyler shrugged and said it was not his business. One crack in loyalty and the foundation shook. Ray stormed outside and slammed the truck door gravel, flying from the tires. Mother sat on the couch, breathing fast, her hands shaking from fear and relief smashed together. I told her she was safe, that the line was hers, that the receipts were in the envelope and no one could undo it. She asked if this was going to make him angrier, and I said maybe. But quiet women are always punished, so sometimes the punishment has to end. I looked at her and promised that the next time he tried to use money as a weapon, I would answer with proof, not shouting, and that one day every relative who laughed at us would see what really lived beneath his charm. So if anyone reading this has lived under financial control or watched someone cancel your lifeline to doctors or work or family, tell me you kept your receipts. Tell me you learned that silence is never safety. Say the word receipts. A week later, the family cookout in Round Rock looked cheerful from the outside, with folding tables covered in plastic red checkered cloth and kids running past sprinklers and cousins grilling burgers under the heavy summer heat. But the moment I stepped into the backyard, I felt the familiar shift in the air, the sideways glances, the quiet evaluations, the pretending Aunt Monica waved like everything was fine, and then leaned in to whisper to another aunt that I finally showed my face after borrowing money. She said it softly, but loudly enough that several heads turned. Ray stood near the grill with a beer in his hand and told the whole group that he had been generous again, that he had lent me $3,500 last winter and was still waiting for his money. He did not mention the cashier's check I had given Monica last week. He did not mention the receipts. He just wanted a narrative where he was the savior and I was the burden. Relatives nodded and clucked their tongues and looked at me like I was a charity case. Humiliation at family gatherings feels like being bitten by 100 tiny insects. No single bite draws blood, but the swarm makes you itch all over. I kept my eyes calm because panic feeds predators. Ray announced loudly that some daughters know how to appreciate family support and others just take. I asked politely if anyone wanted cold tea from the cooler, just to move when I came back. He stood next to my chair and pointed at my shoes. The same Louis Vuitton pair that had shattered his pride at the Domain. He said he might hold on to them until I paid my imaginary debt. He said maybe he should sell them and put the money toward Tyler's startup. Since Tyler had potential relatives, laughed again. They laughed because they believed the shoes were nothing special, because they believed I had nothing, because they believed Ray's lies. Tyler gave me a smug little smile like he was winning a competition. No one asked him to join. Ray said he would take the shoes right then and store them in his truck. Something in my chest stopped beating for a second. Humiliation alone is one thing, but the threat of theft was new. His voice carried across the tables, and silence spread in a wide circle. I could feel eyes on me waiting for me to cry or argue or fold, but this time I did not swallow blood. I set my plate down and said gently that the shoes had AirTag tracking, built in, and serial verification. I told him quietly that the shoes were insured for $120,000 and that moving them without the owner's consent could trigger a claim and an investigation that would include a police report and a review of video footage. Ray blinked. He had not expected calm, he had expected panic. I reached into my bag and held up the certificate Marcus printed with the insurance details and serial verification. I said it lightly, almost kindly, that if the shoes vanished, I would simply file a claim and let the company handle the rest. I said it in front of every relative who had just laughed at me. The garden fell quiet, as if someone turned the volume down. Ray scoffed and tried to tell everyone that I was dramatic, that I was exaggerating, that those shoes were nothing but overpriced tourist junk. But relatives who had smartphones started to search quietly. And when they found articles about limited edition runs and boutique pricing, whispers spread curiosity, spread faster than his lies ever could. I watched Aunt Monica put her phone down and adjust her necklace. I watched Tyler swallow like the math hurt his throat. Ray tried to change the subject. He bragged about Tyler's business idea. Again, he said the family should invest. He said real family supports dreams. When he looked at me, he said daughters who respect their father know how to repay debts. I smiled and told him I had brought something. I reached into my purse and pulled out the cashier's check receipt from last week, the one with Monica's signature. I handed it to Monica and asked her to confirm that I had returned every cent plus interest. Monica stared at the receipt like it was fire. She stammered that, yes, I had paid. Yes, she had received the money. Yes, she had signed. Ray's face darkened as relatives looked back and forth between us. The humiliation he wanted for me now sat in his own lap. He grabbed another beer and muttered that it was not about the money, it was about respect. He said I embarrassed him in front of the boutique manager. I let out a soft breath and said, "Respect is built, not demanded," my voice gentle like a blade hidden in silk. The tension thickened, and the grill smoke curled upward in long gray ribbons. I excused myself and went inside to refill the tea pitcher. When I returned, Ray was telling the family that I was selfish, that I only cared about designer shoes. He had forgotten that some lies cannot be spoken twice in front of evidence. I placed the pitcher down and looked at every relative one by one. I asked if anyone wanted to see the insurance paperwork, the certificate, the serial number, confirmation, the sales documentation. No one answered. They just looked away. Suddenly, the cookout did not feel like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom, and the evidence was stacked on my side. Ray, desperate for control, reached for my shoe. Again, I stepped back gently, but clearly I said, if he touched the shoes, I would call Marcus. The boutique had security footage from earlier. I would file a loss claim and let the investigation follow the money. His hand froze in midair. Mother, Sandra, walked to my side. A small, brave step, she placed her hand on my arm and said she would stand with me. That sentence was tiny, but it broke a decade of silence. Ray sputtered and told her she had no right. But she lifted her chin and said she had every right to protect her daughter. The cookout ended early. Relatives packed food without speaking. Ray slammed the cooler shut and said he was tired of my attitude. He said he would not tolerate disrespect. He said family loyalty was dying because of women who forgot their place. I quietly collected my things and waited by the sidewalk for the rideshare. Mother came with me and asked if I was all right. I told her I was, and I meant it. Because humiliation without response is suffering. But humiliation met with truth becomes justice. I watched Ray through the window, pacing with fury trapped behind his ribs. I knew he would try again. Bullies always return for another round, but now something had shifted. Relatives had seen proof, lies had cracked, and he had learned that I was no longer the girl who walked home in cheap shoes under a hot Texas sun. If anyone listening has ever stood up for themselves in front of relatives who laughed first and went silent, later, tell me you stood your ground. Tell me you saw the moment. Their smiles faded. Say the word, stand. Work was the only place where my name was not twisted into a joke. Atlas Ridge Capital sat on the 31st floor of a glass tower in downtown Austin, and every morning the elevators smelled faintly of espresso and ambition. I wore quiet clothes and walked with quiet steps, and no one knew that the shoes on my feet were insured for $120,000. No one knew anything about my family's chaos. They just saw a young woman who kept her head down and hit every deadline. But keeping your head down does not mean playing small the Monday after the cookout. I opened my laptop before sunrise and read through overnight spreads like they were confession letters. The market had been flattening around a predictable range, and I saw an opportunity, a basis trade with a soft ETH collar that could protect downside while harvesting funding disparity. I typed slowly and carefully, building a case like a lawyer who knew the jury would not believe her unless every fact was nailed to the table. I emailed the CIO at 7:42 a.m. and asked for a small allocation. He responded at 8:06 a.m. with a short approval, a fifth of what I asked for, but enough to prove the point. I executed the structure with surgical patience, not chasing, never panicking. And the trade began to move 9 days later. The desk P&L showed plus $420,000. It was not fireworks by hedge fund standards, but it was elegant, quiet profit. The kind that makes people reconsider the silent girl in the back of the room during the morning run through one of the senior analysts. A man who never remembered my name, but always remembered my shoes. Joked that even a quiet mouse could get lucky. Once the room laughed politely, I said nothing. Instead, I opened the risk log I had kept every day of the trade line. By line scenario. By scenario, every contingency mapped with boring perfection. I slid it across the table to the CIO. He flipped through it and nodded once the analyst's smirk. Faded numbers do not care about pride. Numbers do not care about noise. Numbers speak louder than any bully. Later that afternoon, the CIO sent a message to the desk allocation for my strategies would increase the following quarter. Small step forward, but a step. I sat at my desk and let the silence settle, because quiet victories feel like oxygen to someone who has lived under humiliation the next morning. I walked into the office with a cardboard tray of coffees, caramel black, oat milk, almond milk, iced hot. A messy mix of preferences I had memorized. I placed them on the conference table and said softly that they were from my $20 trash shoes. With love for a moment, no one spoke. Then someone laughed, then another. Then half the team was smiling. The analyst who mocked me picked up his cup and said thank you. Without lifting his eyes, it was a small revenge, polite and funny, but revenge does not always need sharp teeth. Sometimes it just needs a mirror. I filled my mug, walked to my desk, and kept working by the end of the month. The P&L from all my small positions stacked into something heavier, something with gravity. The CIO called me into his office and asked if I would build a memo describing how to scale the strategy with controlled risk. His voice held no sarcasm, no condescension, just respect the kind you earn, not ask for. I thought about telling my family about calling my mother, about showing Ray that his worthless daughter had just generated nearly $500,000 in profit, but a person who weaponizes family will always twist success into something ugly. So I stayed silent. I let my wins pile up quietly, like snow on a roof. The building across the street glowed gold in the evening sun, and I sat at my desk finishing the memo while the rest of the office went to dinner. The world outside buzzed with traffic and laughter inside. The only sound was the soft clicking of keys. I thought about all the nights in college when I studied under cheap fluorescent lights because my 529 had been drained, all the weekends I spent bartending instead of sleeping, all the times Ray told relatives I was lazy. The P&L was not just proof of skill, it was proof that every insult, every dismissal, every curse did not break me. It sharpened me. Later that week, the CIO publicly credited the trade in our meeting. People nodded, someone clapped, my heartbeat slow and steady. Not excitement, just recognition that quiet justice does not always need a courtroom. Sometimes it lives in spreadsheets and execution logs. Sometimes it happens when the person who underestimated you has no words left. I walked home that night past the lake, the air humid and thick. I watched couples sit at outdoor tables, their glasses catching bits of streetlight. I thought about how money can be used to hurt or heal. Ray used it to humiliate. I used it to protect my mother and build my future. Success is not loud. People think revenge requires shouting, but the loudest moment of my week was a quiet coffee tray and a smirk that vanished. I kept a private document on my laptop, not for the fund, but for myself, a folder labeled Receipts, screenshots of P&L screenshots of every cruel text, every dollar I ever earned, legitimately compared to the money Ray stole from my education fund. One day the scales would balance. I knew it not. Now not yet. Revenge works better when the world is watching. I waited patient as stone. The markets moved, cycles turned, and every week I added a small note. Profit here, allocation there. The future building, brick by brick. I took the bus home to keep my life simple and unnoticed. I lived in an apartment that faced west, so I could watch the sky burn orange every evening. There is a peace and silence that only survivors understand. I never bragged, never showed off. Not to relatives, not to Ray, not even to Tyler, who thought potential came from other people's pockets. That Friday, I ordered another batch of insurance forms for the shoes. Not because I needed more proof, but because I wanted documentation to be airtight. If Ray ever touched my property again, I wanted the law to speak for me. Not anger. I closed my laptop, laid on the couch, and stared at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles. I was not the same girl who walked home crying with blisters and shame. I was a woman who built profit out of ruins, and even though my family still tried to shrink me into a small space, every dollar added to the P&L blew another wall out of that cage. If anyone reading this has ever worked silently, while people mocked you if you have ever been called a quiet mouse or a nobody, only to watch your results speak louder than their pride. Tell me you understand quiet justice. Tell me the silence is not weakness. Say the word quiet. Night settled over Lake Travis like a heavy blanket. The water was black and restless under the wind, and the cicadas screamed in the trees, while the sky carried no moon, just thick clouds drifting low, as if even the stars did not want to witness what came next. I sat on the back porch of my mother's small house, with my phone lit in my palm, the screen glowing against my skin, like a confession I did not ask for Ray's text messages, stacked in a long thread, threats disguised as fatherly concern, sentences dripping with entitlement. He wrote that if I did not send $9,800 to support Tyler's business by the end of the week, he would cut me off from the family for good. He wrote that I should apologize for making him look foolish at the boutique, that a daughter who respected her father would bend, not fight. I scrolled back and read them again, each word slicing slower than the last. I heard my mother inside wiping dishes. the small sounds of a woman who always keeps herself busy to outrun her tears. When I looked at the dark yard, I could almost hear the echo of every time he told our relatives that I was ungrateful, a nobody, a disappointment. I thought I had outgrown that pain. But pain that comes from blood has a deeper voice. Then my phone buzzed again, a voice message short. Seconds long, I pressed play, and Ray's voice filled the night swollen with anger and alcohol. He said I was a burden, that my mother should be ashamed of raising someone as useless as me, that I would never amount to anything without family backing. He ended with a laugh, a long, cold exhale that curled into the dark like smoke. My fingers trembled, but my face stayed still. Humiliation is one kind of wound, but betrayal spoken aloud is another. I saved the audio, tucked it into the folder where I kept every receipt of every cruelty inside the house. My mother sniffed quietly, pretending she just had allergies, even though my mother never had allergies. She had heartbreak and fear, and years of being told she was lucky to be tolerated. I stood up and stepped inside. She was drying a plate, her shoulders small and soft. She asked if everything was okay, and I told her yes, because I did not want to add weight to her already fragile spine. But she saw my expression, and she sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. Tears slid down her cheeks. Before she touched them, she said she was sorry. She said she always wanted a peaceful home. She said she did not know how to protect me from him. When he wore the mask of a father, I sat with her and held her hand and told her that none of this was her fault. Trauma makes women apologize for storms they did not create. Her breath shook. She said Ray would come tomorrow and yell again, that he would bring a relative to stand behind him to make her feel small, and that she did not know how much more she could take. I looked at her and felt something in me turn from hurt to steel. I told her he would not yell tomorrow, not the way he expected, because I was done living in quiet corners while men like him wrote the story. It was time for truth. Not anger, not screaming. Just truth, placed in a room where everyone could see it. Truth, with receipts. Truth, with facts. Truth, with calm. The only weapon Ray could not twist. I opened my laptop and pulled up every screenshot, every bank record, every text, every audio. I saved them to a hard drive, then to a second, then to encrypted cloud. I printed out the receipts and slid them into a folder. The sound of each page felt like the click of a lock, the soft weight of protection. Then I logged into every account Ray once had, access to the shared storage, the family plan, the old drive he once used to snoop. I removed his email, revoked his shared permissions, closed every door he used to spy bullies build their power on access, so I locked every window. Every digital keyhole, I enabled two-factor authentication on my financial accounts, not just phone code, but hardware. A small metal key that clicked into my laptop port like a promise no one would ever steal from me again. Not Ray, not Tyler, not anyone who thought I was too quiet to protect myself. I stared at the folder of evidence lying open on the table, the receipts from the lunch with his signature, the insurance certificate for the shoes, the screenshot of the 529 account showing the $27,400. He drained the messages, calling me leech. The audio calling me a burden. It was enough to shatter his whole performance. But exposure is strongest when the audience is there to witness the truth. And I knew exactly where that audience gathered, the Louis Vuitton boutique on Sundays at 3 p.m. The busiest hour, families lined up for gifts, tourists taking photos in front of the gold doorway, relatives from every corner of Austin coming to shop, brag, compare. I could bring the truth there calmly, without screaming, without slapping back, just facts landing like stones, evidence cutting through lies like a surgical light, because some humiliation has to be answered in the same arena where it was born. I told my mother my plan in pieces, not all at once. Because she was afraid of confrontation, she said it might be too much that he would explode, but I told her the difference now was that I was not a girl begging for approval. I was a woman with proof, with rights, with a voice he could not erase, and that I was done letting silence be my cage. She pressed her lips together and nodded. It was not approval. It was surrender to the truth. She had always known I spent the rest of the night preparing quietly, printing demand letters, organizing evidence, reading legal guides on small claims and civil procedure, until my eyes ached at 2 a.m. The wind picked up, the trees rattled against the roof, and I felt the weight of years settling on my chest. I thought about the night I was 18, walking home from the domain because Ray said I needed to learn what independence felt like. I thought about calling him from a payphone and hearing him say to figure it out myself. I thought about how many times I cried into my pillow because my own father saw me as an inconvenience. And tonight, in the dark, I let the tears come quietly just once more. Then I wiped them away and promised myself that this would be the last night my tears belonged to him. Morning came slow, gray, and pale. Mother made coffee and we ate toast in silence. Ray sent another text telling me he would arrive in the afternoon with Monica to collect the shoes for appraisal. He said if I refused, he would involve the family elders. He said I could not hide forever. I looked out the window at the water and felt something sharp and clean inside me. The kind of clarity that arrives only after a soul has been bruised, one time too many. I sent one message back short and calm. Meet me at the domain. 3 p.m. Louis Vuitton bring every relative who needs to hear the truth. Then I put the phone down and packed the folder into my bag. The shoes went in the box. Insured, documented, serial, verified. My heartbeat was steady. Revenge was not rage. Revenge was preparation. Revenge was truth. Being spoken in daylight and let everyone watch the man who laughed at me finally meet the mirror he spent years avoiding. If anyone here has ever reached a breaking point where pain turned into clarity, where silence finally cracked open and truth walked forward, tell me you chose truth and closure over fear. Tell me the day you stopped bowing your head, say the word truth. Sunday at 3 p.m, the domain was alive with families drifting in and out of the boutiques, children licking ice cream tourists, snapping photos, the gold LV doors glinting in the sun like a stage. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking towards something rather than away from it. I carried the shoebox in one hand and the folder tucked calmly against my ribs. My mother walked beside me, quiet but steady when we reached the entrance. Ray was already there with Monica and 2 cousins. He stood with his arms crossed, chest-puffed voice loud enough for anyone to hear. He told them this was his chance to teach me respect, to show the family I was not special. He pointed at my shoes and said the word rubbish again, dragging each syllable like a knife. Monica lifted her phone and hit record live streaming to the family group chat. She smirked and said she was ready to capture the moment of humiliation. I heard the same laughter I heard my whole life. The soft agreement of relatives who loved a show more than the truth. Ray reached for the shoebox and announced he was going inside to trade them for store credit, calling them cheap and fake. I did not hand it over. Instead, I walked into the boutique. First, the air cool and clean, the sound of soft music brushing against the walls. The manager, Marcus, stood behind the counter, and when he saw me, his smile widened with recognition. He came forward and asked if I was here for the serial confirmation, and Ray barked a laugh, saying there was no need, that the shoes were cheap fakes from a discount store, the kind you buy for $20. Marcus paused only for a breath, then carefully opened the box, lifting the shoes like art and placing them under the bright inspection light. The crowd in the boutique shifted. Customers glanced over. Curious Monica tilted her phone toward the table so her live stream would catch every angle. Marcus scanned the serial type numbers into the system, waited, then gasped softly, the kind of gasp that makes a room go silent. And he said clearly that the pair was Louis Vuitton, limited edition, one of 14 worldwide, insured at $120,000. He turned the screen so everyone could see the confirmation, the LV crest, the serial number, the appraisal value. A woman nearby covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Ray's face drained of color. Monica's phone wobbled in her hand as the live stream caught every second of his humiliation. I stepped closer and spoke low, but strong. I said I wanted the insurance documentation printed. Marcus nodded and began the process. Ray stammered, saying he only thought they were cheap because of how I dressed, because of how quiet I always was. He tried to laugh it off, but the laugh cracked in half. Then I pulled out the folder, placing it gently on the marble counter. I opened to the first page. The bank statement showing the 529 account drained in 2018 for $27,400, his signature, at the bottom of the withdrawal request. The next page was the screenshot of the group message demanding $9,800 for Tyler's business and calling me a freeloader. The next page was the restaurant receipt from the previous weekend with his signature, clearly next to the tip line, and the bill listed under Raymond Whitmore. I read each line out loud, slowly, so the room could hear the truth without shouting. Every number was a nail in the coffin he built with his own arrogance. Ray tried to snatch the folder, but I slid it aside calmly. Then I placed the last item, a printed demand letter. Crisp and clean, written in plain language, I informed him that he had 30 days to return the $27,400 to the 529 account, with 6% interest, or I would file a small claims and civil suit. The boutique went completely quiet. Even the soft music seemed to shrink away. Marcus placed the insurance documentation next to the folder. Ray's hands shook. He told me I would not dare, that family does not take family to court, but I looked him in the eyes and told him he took me first when he stole my education fund, when he mocked me, when he tried to sell what he did not buy. I told him this was not revenge, born of hate. It was justice, born of truth. Monica stopped live streaming, suddenly remembering she could also be called as a witness. The cousin stepped back, uncomfortable with the weight of evidence customers watched, as if the floor show had turned into a courtroom. I handed Ray the restaurant receipt, the one with his signature. I told him to keep it safe because when he finished paying back the $529, I would happily store every other financial memory he wanted to pretend did not exist. He stared at me, jaw clenched, throat tight. Ray had spent my whole life yelling, but now he could not make a sound. He tried to blame my mother, accusing her of turning me against him, but I shook my head because he had done that job himself. Marcus asked calmly if he should arrange for security, since Ray seemed unstable. The question alone was humiliation enough. Ray waved his hand and told his relatives to leave. He walked out of the boutique, fast shoulders hunched, face red. Monica followed, phone in her pocket, no longer brave enough to record the cousins pretended they had somewhere else to be. My mother let out a shaking breath, like she had been holding the same breath for decades. The customers who had watched nodded to me. One woman whispered, "Good for you," another murmured, "He deserved it." I thanked Marcus, picked up the folder, closed it carefully, and looked out the glass doors at the sunlight on the walkway. But the scene did not end there. As we stepped outside, Ray turned around, trying to gather whatever pride he had left. He yelled to the crowd that I was a liar, that he only borrowed the money temporarily, that family keeps things private. But I raised the printed copies and told him everything would be private in court filings if he preferred the state of Texas to hold the records. Instead, a murmur rippled through the onlookers. Ray went silent again. The humiliation was no longer just words. It was documented, insured, notarized, undeniable, and there was nothing he could do to bury it under insults. I walked away with my mother, slow and unshaken. Each step felt like the first breath of a new life, the kind of breath you take when someone finally stops choking your spirit. I passed a trash bin on the sidewalk and slipped the old dinner receipt into Ray's shirt pocket, instead telling him gently that once he paid the fund, he could consider this the first souvenir of accountability if anyone here has ever wished for revenge through truth rather than rage. If you have ever held receipts until the world could see the pattern of betrayal. Tell me you know what quiet justice feels like. Say the word receipts. The fallout began before we even reached the parking lot. My phone buzzed with a storm of notifications. The family group chat that once humiliated me thousands of times had exploded into arguments. Screenshots of the insurance appraisal and the withdrawal record for the $27,400 flooded the thread. Some cousins demanded to know why Ray lied about the 529, why he drained a college fund, and then mocked me for working. Others typed long messages defending him, calling it a misunderstanding. But every time someone tried to excuse it, another screenshot surfaced the restaurant receipt with his signature. The text demanding $9,800 for Tyler. My quiet reply saying I would consider it once he returned. The 529, a few aunts began deleting old mocking messages they once sent about my $20 shoes, trying to erase their part. But nothing online truly disappears, and they knew it. The silence from Monica was the loudest. She had to face her own live stream, which captured every second of Ray's humiliation. And the truth of the LV appraisal was already circulating because people screen recorded the moment Marcus spoke the value aloud. My mother sat beside me in the car, staring at her phone like she had never seen our family before. She whispered that she did not know. People could change sides so quickly, I told her they did not change. They just retreated. When receipts appeared that night, more messages came from numbers I barely remembered. Old cousins apologizing and confessing. They were always uncomfortable with how Ray treated me, but they laughed to stay close to him. I read each one politely, but I did not reply because apologies that only come after exposure are not apologies. They are damage control. The next morning, we went to our modest church, where my mother had attended for years. Ray usually sat in the front row, acting like a pillar of the community. This time, he was absent, and whispers flowed before the service. Even started small towns carry news faster than internet. During announcements, the pastor asked the congregation to remember that what we take from others, whether money or dignity, must be repaid if we expect forgiveness. He did not name Ray. He did not have to. Everyone knew. A few people looked at my mother with sympathy, some with respect, and Ray's closest friends avoided eye contact. The moral sting of a church, calling out unpaid debt and humiliation, hurt him more than any lawsuit ever could. I felt no joy, only a quiet sense that the world had finally balanced itself a little after service. My phone rang. It was a deacon asking if I wanted help connecting my mother with a financial advisor since she might need independence. I thanked him and said I was already handling it. When we got home, I pulled up my banking app and removed every auto pay tied to Ray Utilities' insurance phone. Everything he used to claim as his generosity was gone in seconds. My mother trembled, afraid he would retaliate. But I told her financial control is a leash and we just cut it. I ordered her a new debit card, linked to an account only she could access. Then I sat at the kitchen table, opened a budgeting app, and spent 2 hours teaching her line by line how to track expenses, how to set goals, how to breathe without waiting for someone else to approve a basic payment. She cried softly, saying she was ashamed. She never learned this sooner. I told her, shame belonged to the one who hid information to stay powerful, not to the one who learned to stand. That night, I printed a countdown calendar and pinned it to the fridge 30 days until the demand letter deadline expired, an interest clock ticking 6% annually on the debt. Ray swore he never owed. Every morning, my mother crossed off a square like someone counting down to freedom. Meanwhile, messages kept coming. At first accusing, then pleading. Some relatives wanted me to forgive for the sake of family unity. Others urged me to drop the matter because Ray was embarrassed enough. But embarrassment is not repayment. Humiliation is not restitution. Justice is not emotional. Justice is documented. One cousin asked if I was really going to take my father to court. I told him in one sentence that court is not cruelty, it is accountability. He stopped texting during that week. Ray tried creating a new narrative. He told people he always intended to repay the 529, that he only borrowed it temporarily. But the withdrawal papers bore no repayment plan, no note, just extraction, and the church community did not buy his story. Small towns remember facts longer than excuses. I heard from a neighbor that Ray stopped attending Wednesday's study group. Apparently someone asked him when he planned to repay his daughter, and he stormed out. For the first time in my life, I was not the one shrinking in shame. He was, and I did not have to lift a finger. The receipts carried the weight. My quiet nature, once mocked, became armor. I focused on my mother, helped her open her first credit card under her name, taught her how to build her own credit score. She practiced tapping her card at the grocery store and smiled at the tiny beep that sounded like a door unlocking. She told me that for years Ray paid the bills, so she would have no choice but to stay now. She was learning how to walk away. I went to work each morning, like nothing had changed, but underneath the routine was a slow burn of justice. I watched the days on the fridge shrink from 30 to 28 to 25 to 20 each morning. A step closer to closure, the LV shoes stayed in their box, locked safely with insurance documents, proof that not everything about me was small, that not everything Ray saw was truth. The girl he thought he could humiliate had become a woman who could dismantle him with nothing but paperwork and patience. If you have ever taken back your respect using receipts instead of rage, if you have ever waited until the world finally saw the pattern of lies, tell me you understand what this feels like. Say the word respect. The mediation at the Travis County Dispute Resolution Center felt strangely quiet after the chaos of the last month. The walls were beige, the chairs were soft, and the mediator spoke in a gentle voice like, this was a small disagreement about a fence line instead of a father stealing a college fund, humiliating his daughter in public, and then demanding more money. Ray arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses on indoors, even though it was cloudy. He sat across from me and did not look at my face, only at the table. The mediator began by explaining that this was not a courtroom, just a place for open dialogue and voluntary resolution. Then she asked me to share my perspective, and I spoke calmly just as my lawyer advised. I said that in July of 2018, the 529 account was drained of $27,400 without my consent, that the funds were intended for my education, that I took additional jobs and applied for scholarships because the money was gone, that recently Ray demanded $9,800 or he would cut off contact, that he humiliated me publicly, called my shoes rubbish, forced me to pay for a meal of $186, and lied to family members. The mediator nodded and asked for evidence. I slid across the folder labeled Dated Receipts in order the withdrawal photo of the account on July 2nd, the bank statement showing his name, the group text where he said I owed money to the family, the screenshots of him calling me dead weight, the restaurant bill with his signature. Ray leaned back and rolled his eyes. He said the money was for the house, and I should have known that he said I did not deserve a college fund because I moved back home. After graduation, he said the meal was nothing. He said I was dramatic. The mediator asked him to lower his voice. Ray clenched his jaw and claimed he always planned to repay the fund, but I went behind his back to embarrass him at the Louis Vuitton store. I said nothing about embarrassment having value only. Truth does the mediator asked Ray for any proof that he intended to repay the fund. He had none. He mumbled something about cash in an envelope that never appeared, then said the bank account was joint. It was not. It was solely in my name. The mediator looked at me and asked what outcome I sought. I said repayment of $27,400 plus 6% interest over the years, or a settlement of $20,000 in 60 days, and the remainder, $7,400 in 6 months, and a signed non-disparagement agreement preventing Ray from spreading lies again. The mediator nodded and turned to Ray with the proposal. He laughed a sharp, brittle sound that filled the room. He said he would never sign anything that made him look like a criminal. He said his reputation mattered more than cash. The mediator reminded him that this was voluntary, but also a chance to avoid court. Ray slammed his palm on the table. The mediator flinched. He stood up, pointed a shaking finger at me, telling me I ruined this family, telling me that if I dared take him to court, he would tell the judge that I lived off him, that I was ungrateful, that I owed him everything. Then he stormed out. The door swung hard and bounced back. The sound echoed in the hallway. The mediator sighed and wrote the word impasse on her form. She apologized and said some cases simply cannot be resolved. I thanked her calmly, then reached into my laptop bag, pulled out a printed civil cover sheet already filled, and placed it on the table my lawyer had told me to prepare it. And as I walked out of the mediation room, I could hear the soft hiss of the mediator exhaling, like she had seen this story many times before. Outside the building, my mother asked if I was all right. I said yes. I felt nothing. No anger, no regret, only a steady certainty that night. I drafted the email subject line. Final notice in the body of the email I wrote that mediation ended without agreement, that repayment was still required, that failure to comply within the remaining deadline would result in the filing of a civil action in Travis County. I attached the repayment schedule, the demand letter, the mediation summary, the interest calculation, and the civil cover sheet. I copied my lawyer. I pressed send. I did not tremble. Legal justice moves slowly but relentlessly. I researched the filing fees, the service of process, the timeline for response. I learned about garnishment and liens and how a judgment follows a person, like a silent shadow they cannot outrun. I learned that bank levies do not care about pride. I learned that truth becomes heavier when signed by a judge. A few days later, Ray replied with one sentence, "Do whatever you want. You are dead to me." I did not reply. Meanwhile, my mother kept crossing off days on the fridge calendar, and the number dwindled 20 days left, 15, 12, and the silence around Ray grew thicker. He stopped posting pictures with Tyler. His friends stopped tagging him together. One neighbor sent a message to my mother saying, "Ray looked tired and angry. Every time he left the house, I almost felt pity." But I reminded myself that pity without accountability becomes permission, and I was done giving permission. Around the 10th day, my lawyer emailed me. The filing instructions told me to prepare bank information for garnishment. If judgment was awarded, told me the likely timeline for hearings, told me to stay consistent and civil. That night, I printed everything again, placed it in a binder labeled each section. Receipts are armor and armor. Keeps you standing even when family tries to pull you apart. If you believe in justice without hate, in accountability without screaming, if you know what it means to stand firm and quiet, say one word for me, say justice. The silence lasted 8 days. Then on the 9th, my phone buzzed with a name I once answered without hesitation. Ray, the message was short and brittle. "I need time. Do not take this public." I stared at the screen and felt a strange calm. The truth was never public. Everything lived in a private folder in my laptop, in a small stack of printed receipts. I never humiliated him. I simply stopped allowing him to humiliate me. I replied with a single sentence. The deadline remains 2 days later. My mother knocked gently on my bedroom door. She held the phone against her chest and whispered that Ray wanted to speak to her and that she was afraid to answer. I took the phone and said hello. Ray's voice sounded thinner, almost hoarse. He said, "The church knew. The neighbors knew." His boss asked questions. His debit card was declined at the gas station. He needed time because the world was turning on him, and he was not prepared. He said, "I could ruin him." He said he was still my father. My mother sat close, her fingers trembling, and for a moment I remembered childhood swings at the park, Little League bleachers, birthday candles, but every moment from the past collided with the sharpness of the last few years, the control, the insults, the theft of the 529, the humiliation at the domain, the mediator watching him slam his hand on the table. So I spoke clearly. I said I did not ruin him. He did that himself. The only thing I ever asked for was repayment of money he took and an apology to my mother. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Fine. Just please do not drag me into court the next morning." We met at a small office next to the county clerk. The notary waited with a blue ink pen. Ray looked smaller. His shirt wrinkled, his hair untrimmed. I handed him the repayment agreement. He blinked as he read each line. $10,000 immediately through cashier check. $17,400 plus 6%, interest over 9 months through auto debit from his account. A signed handwritten apology to my mother, a non-disparagement clause, forbidding him from spreading lies, a 6-month no-contact order, so my mother could breathe a clause that said any violation would result in a judgment and garnishment. I watched his throat tighten. He asked if I would remove the clause about the apology. I said no. Emotional harm counts too. He asked again if I would skip the interest. I said no time costs something. He asked me for a promise that I would speak kindly of him, to the family. I said nothing, just pointed where he had to sign his hand, shook a little, but he signed. Then reached into his jacket, pulled out a cashier check for $10,000. The paper looked heavy. The notary stamped the agreement, slid a copy to him, and a copy to me. Ray stood up, muttered a quiet, "Thank you," that sounded more like a surrender. My mother wiped her eyes as he walked out of the office and down the hall without turning back. She whispered that she never thought she would see him sign something like that. She never thought there would be a day she could breathe without waiting for the next insult that afternoon. She and I went to Jeffrey's in Austin, a place she had only seen on television. White napkins, soft lighting steak. She never imagined she could order without counting dollars. She kept saying, "This feels unreal." I told her quiet justice never screams. It just arrives when you stop apologizing for existing the next day. I enrolled her in a better health insurance plan, the kind with dental and vision. She hugged me and said no one ever protected her before. For a few weeks, she stayed in a small apartment with a balcony that caught the evening sun. She tended tiny potted plants and took long walks without looking over her shoulder. Sometimes we cooked dinner together and she laughed at how foreign peace felt. Meanwhile, the auto debit for the repayment started on schedule. Month 1 cleared, then month 2, each payment a silent knock saying, accountability has finally come home. I never told the cousins, never sent screenshots to the group chat. Humiliation was his weapon. Truth was mine. On a cool Friday night near the start of winter, I walked through the Domain alone. The neon signs painted color across the pavement. The glass windows of Louis Vuitton reflected pairs of shoes. Behind the display mine caught a trace of blue and gold across the surface. Limited edition, insured at $120,000. Yet it was never about the dollar value. It was about something quiet, the kind of dignity no one can take back once you stand up. I walked slowly past the restaurant where I once paid $186 while everyone laughed, past the place where Ray spat on my feet. Past the corner where Monica lifted her phone to turn me into entertainment. No one recognized me. No one knew a girl in a cotton shirt. Once stood there shaking, I felt no pride, only certainty. I did not win to show off, I won because I stopped letting someone else write my story, and when the night breeze moved through the courtyard lights, I whispered something I needed to hear for a long time. I am not rubbish. If you have ever carried receipts in your heart, if you know what it means to stand up without screaming, if you believe in quiet justice, silent revenge, emotional resilience, dignity, over money, truth and closure, standing up for yourself, reclaiming respect, lessons in betrayal, justice, without hate, revenge through truth, then you know why I am still here. Say it with me, say still here.